Sups everybody, Mr. Sups here, back with more homework for Evolution of Video Games. So last time we discussed Nintendo coming to America. Here we're discussing their rise to power. In the last episode I kind of hinted at they got super powerful. They became a tenth of the trade deficit of America and Japan. And 4 years after the NES came out, they got big. So big in fact that, remember how I said they partnered with a toy company, Worlds of Wonder, to sort of help them along into getting through the homes? Worlds of Wonder went out of business because they got so sort of big. They thought Teddy Ruxpin was going to be so huge the year that the NES came out, and when the NES beat them, they just couldn't recover because they had too much Teddy Ruxpins. So they went out of business, and in a cool move, and probably which explains what's going to happen in the rest of this recap, Nintendo pretty much absorbed Worlds of Wonder, the defunct company, because, as I said also last time, they had a lot of ex-Atari guys, a lot of ex-game development people, and they also had a infrastructure in the States that Nintendo didn't have before, so they got absorbed. Got a lot of people jobs who normally wouldn't have had jobs in that situation, so that's cool. Cool Nintendo. Cool Yamauchi. That probably contributed to the rise, but what mainly had the rise to power of Nintendo was their aggressive quality control, as well as their games and their, again, aggressive branding. Now, Nintendo's quality control could charitably be described as draconian. They made damn sure not to repeat any of Atari's mistakes when they were just starting out. And again, like I said in the previous episode, they had a very tight grip on who and who could not get onto the NES. So much so that they built in sort of safeguards to make sure that, say, this is not a Nintendo game, this is not going to work. Now, that may seem standard now, but it was a problem with Atari, and Nintendo's was actually very, very good. But then the guys at Rare kind of cracked it in the afternoon, but we're going to get into that later. But this sort of quality assurance sort of scheme really worked out in the end for Nintendo, because that's one of the things that killed Atari with games like Chase the Chuckwagon and Custer's Revenge. So the average game on a Nintendo console was still kind of better, had a better sort of seal of quality than the games that got onto an average 2600. Now, this really worked well for them, but it also scared off a lot of potential developers because there was still a high bar for entry because of that. It also scared away the American market, EA kind of didn't want to touch it because they were so draconian with their policy. And of course, there was some long-standing cultural mistrust due to World War II happening about 40 years prior, 30 years actually? No. Japanese-American relationships. What also kind of contributed to the rise to power was the games, and you can name so many games that came out during this era, in 1987. Mario, Zelda, Metroid, Castlevania, Mike Tyson's Punch-Out! All these games that are so ubiquitous with video games now. And they made sure that they would be ubiquitous with the games because they capitalized on them hardcore. Hyper-aggressive advertising, commercials out the wazoo, and also an entire magazine, Nintendo Power, just to sell these games. It worked. Although this also had a bit of a snag, as I said, Mike Tyson's Punch-Out. Yeah, Mike Tyson's gotten involved in a scandal after Mike Tyson's Punch-Out came out, and as soon as the contract came up to be renewed, yeah, he was dropped. He was dropped like a rock, and now it's Punch-Out featuring Mr. Dream. It may seem that they had this iron grip on the industry, and they did, but they were not unopposed, because there was Sega! Yeah, Sega was around, and they tried multiple times to take down Nintendo, or to just compete with them. They had multiple consoles, some of them you might not even have heard of, the Sega 1000, the Sega 1000 Mark II, and the Sega Master System. They even tried to pull a Worlds of Wonder, like Nintendo did, partner up with a toy company to get that that brand recognition and just put them right next to the main toy, just so people might see it in the store. They partnered up with Tonka, and it kind of didn't work. But then they tried something new, something greater, a new Genesis, if you will, and class ended. We're going to discuss that later. Speaking of discussions, here's where we get into the actual discussion. It's sort of a continuation of something that we started in class, and that was Zelda. Now, we were given an article, which again, unfortunately, I cannot link you to due to the format, so I'm just going to flash the abstract on screen and also a little sort of table that goes along with it. The article is about paradigm shifts in the video game industry. Now, for those of you who don't know, a paradigm shift is a dramatic shift in the way of thinking and the way a lot of things are run and the way things are done. Like, a good example is how a lot of businesses changed with the advent of computers and the internet. Some became stronger than ever, some began to weaken. Some were created and some died. It's a thing that happens. And it happened in the game industry. And it continues to happen in the game industry. It happens a lot. And Zelda is a very good example of a paradigm shift sort of happening, or less of it happening and more of it being a great example of the paradigm shift that was happening in the video game industry at the time. Now, the paradigm shifts the article states are like the entry of video game as a medium, as a market. Like them going into the arcades and becoming a major success. And a lot of people kind of shifting their way of thinking of how can we make a business out of this? How can we do the whole video game angle? And that's where we get into the arcades. And around that time, games were meant to be played for a few minutes at most. You would pop in a quarter and you would see how far you can get. And the game was trying to kill you as quickly as it could. So you can put in another quarter and you can continue playing and continue putting in quarters. It's just kind of how the games were designed. And then, like, we get consoles. We get the home game market. That's the second paradigm shift that the article talks about. And then here is where Zelda comes in. Because a game that you play in an arcade is completely different from a game that you play at home. Imagine if Zelda was an arcade game. It wouldn't work. It would make no money and it would die. Because most arcade games are trying to kill you. You pop in your quarter and you play until you die. And the more successful an arcade game, the better that turnaround would be. And the point of an arcade game is to measure your skill against that. The longer that quarter lasts you, the better you are, the more enjoyment you get out of it. But that's not the enjoyment that Zelda gets out of it. The joy of Zelda is to go around and explore, and to solve various puzzles. To take your time. Because in an arcade game, they want you to be there 10 minutes at most. You can't get anywhere in Zelda in 10 minutes. You have to go around, you have to explore everything. You go around, you see something, you see an island that you can't get to, but you see an object that you can get. You don't know how to get it, you have to go around, you have to explore, you need to find something. To get that, you have to go and explore the dungeon, you have to find a tool where you can go and get more stuff to explore more things. That's the beauty of Zelda. That's what it's supposed to be. And you can't do that in 10 minutes. You play Zelda for hours at most, and if there's going to come a point where you're going to put it down, and you're going to save your progress, and then you're going to come back to it at a later date. You can't do that in the arcade. You can't say, alright, I'm going to continue on level 9 and see if I can make my score higher. You have to start from the beginning and get to level 9 and see if you can get beyond level 9. And here's where it gets into a business sense. If you're not going to charge a quarter for 10 minutes, how much do you charge? That's where, like, various pricing models come out. And how a game that's supposed to last you a long time will cost you $40 to $60. And why people expect longer, more fulfilling experiences out of that big upfront cost. And when a game is short or not fulfilling, they don't like it in a home console game or like a computer game and all that. They want something that they can sink hours upon hours into. They want something that's worth the price. In an arcade, it's a quarter. It's maybe $1. And you know what? If you don't like it, no, it's just a quarter. It's just $1. It's cool. At home, it's like, no, that's a decent portion of my paycheck right there, gone. I want more out of this. And this way of thinking, this paradigm, still persists today. And you can kind of see it going through something of a shift, or some turbulence right now, with the online gaming sphere. Because there are these big sort of experiences that are costing more and more and more and more to make. The article even points out, by the way, this article was in 2008, that traditional games are taking like 2 years and $20 million to develop. Then we have games like Destiny and Grand Theft Auto 5, which have like hundreds of millions of dollars to make, $100 million budgets. And because of that, they need to sell more and more. They need to make more and more money to recoup that cost. And with the advent of digital distribution, we're seeing like that big sprawly experience being kind of offered to us piecemeal, which a lot of people aren't really okay with. Some of them are okay with when it's done well or something like that. It's just something to think about. That these paradigm shifts happen constantly. We're going through one now, not related to that, but with like mobile gaming. And who knows what gaming's going to look like 2 or 3 years down the line. It's just something to think about. All I can say is I hope when that paradigm does shift, I hope that games remain